The scent of pine and fresh earth filled my lungs as I stood beside my father in the small mountain cemetery of Asheville, North Carolina. The October wind whipped through my hair as we watched them lower my mother's casket into the ground. My hands trembled as I placed a bouquet of wild roses, her favorite, on the fresh dirt. I'm Emma Sullivan, a 30-year-old chef running my own catering business in Boston, and this was the beginning of a storm that would test not only my marriage but challenge generations of deeply held Southern traditions. Maybe you should stay a while longer, sugar, Dad said softly, his calloused carpenter's hands squeezing mine. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper now, etched by loss. I nodded, knowing Marcus, my husband of 2 years, would understand. He had already flown back to Boston for his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, leaving me to help Dad handle the aftermath of Mom's unexpected heart attack. I found myself touching my wedding ring, a habit that surfaced whenever difficult decisions loomed. The simple platinum band represented everything Marcus and I had built together, a marriage based on partnership rather than the rigid roles my mother-in-law, Victoria Hamilton, believed in so firmly. The days after the funeral blurred together in a haze of paperwork and casseroles delivered by well-meaning neighbors. Dad tried to stay busy in his workshop, but I caught him staring at Mom's empty rocking chair on the porch more times than I could count. Each evening, I video called Marcus, finding solace in his gentle brown eyes and warm smile. He showed me his attempts at cooking dinner, sometimes surprisingly good, sometimes hilariously bad, but he was managing. That's what I loved about him. His willingness to learn, to share, to be a true partner. The kitchen looks like a tornado hit it, he laughed during one of our calls, panning his phone across countertops dusted with flour. But hey, I managed to make that pasta recipe you taught me. Despite my grief, I couldn't help but smile. Just promise me you won't burn down our apartment before I get back. What I didn't know then was that this simple domestic scene would ignite a firestorm that would shake both our families to their core. It happened on a crisp Wednesday afternoon. Marcus's mother, Victoria Hamilton, Boston's self-proclaimed guardian of proper social etiquette and traditional values, decided to make an impromptu visit to check on her son. The sight that greeted her, her Harvard-educated surgeon son wearing an apron and stirring a pot while singing along to Spotify, was apparently enough to crack her perfectly maintained facade of propriety. I was helping Dad organize Mom's beloved cookbook collection when my phone lit up with Victoria's name. My stomach clenched. She rarely called me directly. When I answered, her voice came through tight and clipped, her Boston Brahmin accent more pronounced than usual. Emma. Her tone could have frozen summer. I just witnessed something thoroughly disturbing. My son, a Hamilton, cooking like common kitchen help. I pressed my fingers to my temples, fighting back the headache I could feel building. Hello, Victoria. Yes, Marcus has been cooking while I'm away. He's quite capable, Dash. Capable. She cut me off, her voice rising an octave. A Hamilton man does not belong in the kitchen. This is what happens when a wife neglects her duties. If you cannot maintain proper standards, perhaps you should step aside for someone who can. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of Mom's old kitchen counter, my knuckles white against the worn wood. The familiar space suddenly felt suffocating. The grief of losing my mother colliding with this unexpected assault on my marriage. Victoria. I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'm here because my mother just passed away. Marcus understands that, and he's perfectly capable of taking care of himself for a few days. We're partners, Dash. Partners? She pronounced the word as if it tasted of vinegar. This modern nonsense is destroying the fabric of proper society. A wife's primary duty is to maintain her husband's household. You're letting him live like a bachelor while you gallivant around North Carolina. You should divorce him now before you completely ruin the Hamilton name. The absurdity of her words would have been laughable if they hadn't been so cutting. Here I was, still raw from burying my mother, and my mother in law was suggesting divorce because her son had the audacity to cook his own dinner. The mixture of grief and anger churned inside me like a gathering storm. My response came out low and firm. Victoria, I'm going to end this call now. When you're ready to apologize for this incredibly insensitive and inappropriate conversation, you can reach out. Until then, I suggest you discuss your concerns with Marcus directly. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Through the kitchen window, the wind was picking up, rustling the maple trees Mom had planted years ago, their leaves a riot of red and gold. I sank into her old chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by the lingering scent of her signature apple pies, and let the tears flow, tears of loss, of anger, of frustration at fighting battles I never expected to face while mourning. Dad found me there an hour later, still sitting among Mom's cookbooks, my eyes red but my spine straightening. He took one look at my face and pulled up a chair beside me, his presence as comforting as it had been when I was a little girl. "Want to talk about it, Emma Bear?" he asked, using my childhood nickname. I told him everything, watching his expression shift from concern to disbelief to barely contained anger. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at Mom's favorite apron still hanging by the stove. "Your mama and me," he finally said, his soft mountain accent thicker with emotion. "We weren't perfect, but we were a team. That's what marriage ought to be." He covered my hand with his. "Don't let anybody tell you different. Baby girl." I nodded, grateful for his wisdom, but knowing this was far from over. The clash between modern partnership and traditional values that had been simmering beneath the surface of my marriage was about to boil over, and I wasn't sure any of us were prepared for what would come next. That evening I tried calling Marcus, but he was in surgery. Instead, I found myself dialing my father-in-law, Richard Hamilton, a man who had always seemed more reasonable than his wife, despite their traditional marriage. "Emma," he answered promptly, his voice warm but concerned. "I heard about Victoria's interaction with you today. I want to apologize." "Richard," I sighed, relaxing slightly at his caring tone. The contrast between husband and wife had always fascinated me. How could two people sharing a life have such different worldviews? I don't understand. Mom's funeral was barely 2 weeks ago, and Victoria's biggest concern is that Marcus made himself dinner. I heard ice cubes clinking against glass, Richard's nightly Scotch ritual, before he spoke. "Emma, you have to understand that Victoria comes from a very particular world. The Hamiltons have certain expectations. When we married, things were different. But it's 2024, not 1954. I protested, pacing Mom's kitchen. The wooden floorboards creaked under my feet, a familiar sound from my childhood. Marcus and I agreed on how we wanted our marriage to work before we even got engaged. He knows I love cooking. It's literally my profession, but that doesn't mean I have to be the only one who does it. Through the kitchen window, I watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Mom used to say these mountains had seen generations of change, yet remained steadfast. Maybe my marriage needed to be like these mountains, strong enough to weather any storm. "I know, Emma," Richard's voice was gentle. "And believe me, I'm proud of the man Marcus has become. The way you two support each other, it's what I always wanted for him." He paused, and I could picture him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and family portraits. But Victoria, she measures her success as a mother by how well she upheld tradition. Seeing Marcus in that kitchen challenged everything she believes about her role in life. My anger softened slightly, but didn't disappear. That doesn't give her the right to attack our marriage or suggest divorce. Especially not now, when I'm dealing with— My voice cracked and I had to take a deep breath before continuing. "When I'm dealing with losing Mom." "Of course it doesn't," Richard agreed firmly. "I'll talk to her. But Emma, maybe we need to do more than talk this time. Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. What do you mean? Victoria needs to understand that times have changed. Maybe it's time she experienced exactly what she's demanding of you. Before I could ask what he meant, I heard a commotion in the background. Victoria's voice, sharp and angry. Richard? Richard Hamilton. Are you speaking to that girl? I need to go, Richard said quickly. Don't worry about Victoria. I'll handle this. After hanging up, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the first stars appear over the mountains. Mom's voice seemed to whisper in my memory. Baby girl, sometimes love means standing your ground, even when it hurts. I touched the worn cookbook on the counter. Her favorite, its pages stained and dog-eared from years of use. Would she know what to do in this situation? My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Just out of surgery. Success. Missing you. Don't worry about Mom. Dad's got a plan. I smiled despite everything. My brilliant surgeon husband, who could perform complex procedures but still managed to create chaos in our kitchen while making pasta. The man who supported my dreams of starting my own catering business, who showed up at every event with his sleeves rolled up, ready to help. How could anyone think our marriage was wrong? The next morning, I woke to several missed calls from Marcus and a long text message that made my jaw drop. Apparently, Richard had decided to take drastic measures. He'd fired their housekeeper of 20 years and informed Victoria that since she believed so strongly in traditional gender roles, she would now be responsible for all household duties, cooking, cleaning, laundry, everything. Mom's furious, Marcus wrote. Dad told her she can have help back when she apologizes to you and accepts that times have changed. She's currently trying to figure out how to work the washing machine. I sat on Mom's porch swing, letting the morning mountain mist cool my face as I processed this information. Part of me felt guilty. Victoria was in her 60s, used to a life of privilege. But another part of me, the part still stinging from her cruel words during my time of grief, thought maybe this was exactly what she needed. Dad brought me a cup of coffee, settling beside me on the swing. You've got that look, he observed. The one your mama used to get when she was wrestling with something tough. I showed him Marcus's message, watching his reaction. He read it twice, then let out a low whistle. Well, looks like Richard Hamilton's got more spine than folks gave him credit for. Do you think it's too harsh? I asked, voicing my concerns, making her do everything herself at her age. Dad took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. Sometimes people need to walk a mile in someone else's shoes to understand their perspective. Your mama used to say that empathy can't be taught, it has to be experienced. I leaned my head against his shoulder, like I used to do when I was little. I miss her so much, Dad. I wish she was here to help me figure this out. She is here, sugar, he said softly, patting my hand. In every lesson she taught you, in every recipe she passed down, in every time you stand up for what's right, just like you're doing now. As if on cue, my phone rang again. It was Marcus. When I answered, I could hear chaos in the background, what sounded like a smoke alarm, and Victoria's voice raised in panic. Marcus tried to suppress a laugh. Mom just tried to make breakfast. Let's just say it didn't go well. Dad's refusing to call for takeout. He says she needs to learn. I could picture the scene. The immaculate Hamilton kitchen in disarray, Victoria in her designer clothes facing the reality of domestic work for the first time in decades. Is she okay? Physically? Yes. Her pride? Not so much. He paused. She's really going to have to learn to cook. Dad's serious about this. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria Hamilton, who had criticized my absence during a family crisis, was now facing her own domestic crisis. But unlike me, who had a legitimate reason to be away from home, she had brought this on herself through her own rigid beliefs. Should I feel bad about this? I asked Marcus, voicing my internal conflict. Honestly? No, He said firmly, Mom needs to understand that her views aren't just outdated, they're harmful. Do you know what she said to me when she saw me cooking? That I was degrading the Hamilton name, as if being able to feed myself somehow makes me less of a person. I heard Victoria in the background. Marcus? Who are you talking to? Is that her? Tell her this is all her fault. Marcus sighed. I should go. Dad's calling a family meeting tonight. He says things are going to change around here one way or another. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the morning mist rise off the mountains. Mom had always said that sometimes the universe has its own way of teaching people lessons. Maybe this was one of those times. Dad appeared with fresh coffee and his tool belt, heading to the workshop. Want to help me finish that rocking chair I was making for your mama? Seems like you could use something to keep your hands busy while your mind sorts things out. I nodded gratefully. There was something soothing about working with wood, about creating something beautiful and lasting. As we walked to his workshop, I couldn't help but wonder what the next few days would bring. The battle lines had been drawn, but in this war of tradition versus progress, would there be any real winners? The next few days passed in a strange blur of grief and anticipation. I spent my mornings helping Dad in his workshop, the rhythmic sound of sandpaper against would becoming a meditation of sorts. In the afternoons, I'd go through Mom's recipes, each handwritten note and food-stained page telling stories of family dinners and holiday gatherings. The updates from Boston, meanwhile, painted a picture of increasing chaos in the Hamilton household. She tried to do laundry today. Marcus texted me on Friday, mixed her silk blouses with Dad's dress shirts. Everything's pink now. I was almost starting to feel sorry for Victoria when the next bomb dropped. It happened during our evening video call, while I was sitting in Mom's garden, surrounded by her beloved roses. Marcus's face appeared on my screen, looking more serious than usual. We need to talk about Mom, he said, running a hand through his dark hair. A gesture I knew meant he was stressed. She's gone a bit off the deep end. My stomach tightened. What happened? He glanced over his shoulder before continuing, lowering his voice. She showed up at the hospital today, in the middle of my rounds, started causing a scene about how I'm destroying the family name by letting you abandon me. I felt the blood drain from my face. She did what? Yeah. He sighed heavily, started telling my colleagues how I'm being neglected and forced to live like a common laborer. Dr. Chen, you remember her, my department head? Had to escort Mom out. The embarrassment in his voice made my heart ache. Marcus had worked incredibly hard to build his reputation as a surgeon. To have his mother try to undermine that, oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. Don't be, he said firmly. This isn't your fault. If anything, it's shown me exactly how toxic Mom's beliefs are. Dad's furious. He's never seen her act like this. Before I could respond, I heard a commotion in the background. Victoria's voice, shrill and angry, followed by the sound of something shattering. Marcus's head whipped around. I've got to go, he said quickly. I'll call you back. The call ended, leaving me staring at a dark screen, my heart racing. Dad found me there 10 minutes later, still clutching my phone. Bad news, he asked, settling beside me on the garden bench. I told him about Victoria's hospital scene, watching his expression darken. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at Mom's roses swaying in the evening breeze. Your mama would have had some choice words for that woman, he finally said. She never did hold with people who tried to tear others down to build themselves up. I just don't understand, Dad, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. Why does she hate me so much? What did I do wrong? Oh, sugar. Dad wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just can't handle change. They'd rather break something than let it bend. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. We need to talk. Can you video call? With trembling fingers, I dialed. Richard's face appeared, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. He was in his study, the familiar backdrop of books, providing little comfort tonight. "Emma," he said gravely, "I owe you an apology. I thought making Victoria experience what she was demanding of you would teach her a lesson. Instead, it seems to have pushed her over the edge. The hospital incident." He nodded. That was just the beginning. After Marcus left for his shift, she started throwing things, breaking dishes, saying she's going to make sure you and Marcus get divorced one way or another. He rubbed his temples. "I've never seen her like this. It's like she's having some kind of breakdown." The guilt I'd been fighting surged up. "Richard, maybe we should stop this. Let her have the housekeeper back." "No," he said firmly. "This isn't about the housework anymore. Emma, this is about control. Victoria's realizing she can't control Marcus anymore, can't control how society is changing, and she's not handling it well." He paused, looking suddenly older. "I've called her sister, Margaret. She's a therapist. She's flying in tomorrow." I remembered Margaret from the wedding, a kind-faced woman who'd apologized for her sister's traditional views. "Do you think it'll help?" "It has to," Richard sighed. "Because right now, Victoria's on track to lose everything she claims she's trying to protect: her relationship with her son, her marriage, her dignity." A crash sounded in the background, followed by Victoria's voice. "Richard? Richard Hamilton, are you talking to that woman again? That homewrecker who's destroyed our son?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I need to go. But Emma, don't let this make you doubt yourself, what you and Marcus have. That's what marriage should be." After we hung up, I sat in Mom's garden until the stars came out, thinking about marriage, tradition, and change. The roses Mom had tended so carefully were still blooming, adapting to the cooling weather while staying true to their nature. Maybe that's what Victoria couldn't understand, that adapting doesn't mean losing yourself. My phone buzzed again. "Marcus, coming to Asheville tomorrow. Need to get away from the chaos here. And I miss you." I pressed the phone to my heart, feeling it race. Then I noticed another message, this one from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was from Victoria. "You think you've won? You think turning my husband and son against me makes you strong? I'll show you what happens to people who destroy families. I'm coming to North Carolina. Time we had a real talk, face to face." I sat there in the darkening garden, Mom's roses swaying in the night breeze, wondering how a simple act of love, staying to help my grieving father, had spiraled into this. But as I looked at Mom's favorite rose bush, the one she'd nursed through countless winters, I felt my spine straighten. Mom's voice seemed to whisper on the wind, "Stand your ground. Baby girl, some storms you have to weather to see the rainbow." I texted Marcus about his mother's message. His response was immediate. "Don't worry. I'm getting on the first flight out. We'll face this together." Together. That was what Victoria had never understood. Marriage wasn't about control or rigid roles. It was about facing life's storms together, supporting each other, growing together like Mom's intertwined roses. As I headed inside, I saw Dad in his workshop, light still burning as he worked on Mom's rocking chair. Some people created in the face of chaos. Some, like Victoria, tried to destroy. I knew which path I would choose. I just hoped Victoria's arrival wouldn't turn this family storm into a hurricane. The next morning dawned gray and stormy, as if nature itself was preparing for the confrontation to come. I was in Dad's kitchen, stress baking Mom's signature apple pie, when Marcus arrived. The moment I saw him standing in the doorway, raindrops glistening in his dark hair, something inside me broke. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, wrapping me in his arms as I burst into tears. "I've got you," he murmured into my hair. "We've got this." "I'm so sorry." I sobbed against his chest. "Your career, your mother, everything's such a mess." "Hey," he pulled back, cupping my face in his hands. "None of this is your fault. If anything, This whole situation has shown me exactly how strong we are together. A throat cleared behind us. Dad stood there, work apron dusty with sawdust. Good to see you, son, he said, extending his hand to Marcus. Wish it was under better circumstances. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Me too, Jim. How are you holding up? Before Dad could answer, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the rain. Through the kitchen window, I saw a rental car pull up. Victoria Hamilton stepped out, immaculate despite the weather in her designer suit and pearls. Behind her, Richard emerged from the driver's side, looking grim. And to my surprise, a third person exited the back seat. Margaret, Victoria's sister. Well, Dad said quietly, looks like the storm's arrived. My hands trembled as I wiped them on my apron, leaving traces of flour. The pie in the oven still had 20 minutes to go. Such a mundane detail to focus on when my world was about to explode. Victoria didn't wait to be invited in. She swept through the front door like an avenging angel, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors Mom had lovingly maintained for decades. When she reached the kitchen doorway, she stopped dead, taking in the domestic scene before her, me in my flour-dusted apron, Marcus's arm protectively around my waist, Dad leaning against his workbench. So, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, this is why my son has been reduced to cooking for himself, because you're playing happy families in this. This what, Mother? Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. This home? Where people actually care about each other instead of appearances. Victoria recoiled as if slapped. Marcus, how dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother. Yes, you are, he agreed. And I love you. But I don't love what you're doing. Coming to my workplace? Threatening my wife? This isn't you, Mom. Or at least, it's not who I thought you were. Richard and Margaret had entered behind Victoria, creating an audience for this family drama. The kitchen suddenly felt very small, charged with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Not who you thought I was? Victoria's voice rose. I am exactly who I've always been. A mother who wants the best for her son. A woman who understands the proper way of things. And you? She turned to me, eyes blazing. You've corrupted him with your common ways, your modern marriage nonsense. That's enough, Victoria. It was Richard's voice, firm and commanding. You're not just embarrassing yourself anymore. You're hurting people we love. Love. She whirled on her husband. What do you know about love? You've taken her side. Everyone's taken her side. Am I the only one who sees what she's doing to our family? The timer on the oven chimed, making everyone jump. Almost on autopilot, I moved to take out the pie, the familiar motions grounding me in the chaos. The scent of apples and cinnamon filled the kitchen. Mom's recipe, Mom's kitchen, Mom's lessons about love and strength. Your mother would be proud, Dad said softly, and something in Victoria snapped. She grabbed the nearest object, a glass of water, and threw it. I ducked, but Marcus wasn't fast enough. The glass shattered against his shoulder, water soaking his shirt. The kitchen froze in horrified silence. Victoria. Margaret stepped forward, finally breaking her silence. Stop this right now. But Victoria wasn't done. She reached for another glass, her movements frenzied. This time, Richard caught her wrist. Enough! His voice thundered through the kitchen. Look at what you're doing. Look at your son's face. Victoria did look, and for the first time, I saw her really see. Marcus stood there, water dripping from his shirt, a small cut on his neck where a shard of glass had caught him. But it was his expression, a mixture of hurt, disappointment, and pity that seemed to finally reach her. Marcus, her voice suddenly small, uncertain. I didn't mean. Her legs seemed to give out, and Margaret quickly guided her to a chair. Victoria collapsed into it, her perfectly maintained facade crumbling as she began to sob. I don't know who I am anymore, she choked out. Everything's changing so fast. Marcus is cooking. Richard's turning against me. The world, it's all wrong. Margaret knelt beside her sister. No, Vicky, the world isn't wrong. It's just different from what you expected. And that's okay. I moved to the cupboard, taking down Mom's old first aid kit. Silently, I began cleaning the small cut on Marcus's neck. His hand found mine, squeezing gently. Mom, he said softly, do you know what made me fall in love with Emma? Victoria looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. It was watching her in the kitchen at her catering company, not because she was cooking, though she's brilliant at it, but because of how she ran her team. Men, women, young, old. Everyone had a role based on their skills, not their gender. Everyone was valued. That's what I wanted in my life. A partnership where we both bring our best to the table. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks as he spoke. Dad cleared his throat, emotion thick in his voice as he added, that's what Sarah and I had, what Emma's mama and I built together. A life where we lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. Victoria's sobs had quieted to hiccups. But what about tradition? What about everything I was taught? Traditions can change, Vicky, Margaret said gently. They're meant to serve us, not imprison us. The room fell quiet, except for the rain against the windows and Victoria's ragged breathing. The pie on the counter continued to fill the air with its homey scent, a reminder of simpler times, of love expressed through action rather than rules. Finally, Victoria spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I think I need help. Margaret squeezed her sister's hand. That's why I'm here. We'll figure this out together. I looked around the kitchen, at Marcus's damp shirt, the broken glass, the pie cooling on the counter, Dad's worried face, Richard's relief, Margaret's compassion, and Victoria's tears. This was family in all its messy, complicated glory. Not the perfect picture Victoria had tried to maintain, but something real and raw and worth fighting for. The storm outside was beginning to ease, just as the storm in our lives seemed to be reaching a turning point. But, as Mom always said, sometimes you have to weather the storm to see the rainbow. The weeks that followed felt like watching a glacier slowly thaw. Victoria began seeing a therapist regularly with Margaret's support and guidance. She didn't change overnight. Deep-seated beliefs rarely do. But small shifts began to appear, like first flowers breaking through winter frost. It started with a text message 3 days after the kitchen incident. Emma, I'm sorry for the glass. And everything else. Victoria. Brief, formal, but a start. Marcus showed me the message while we sat on Dad's porch swing, watching the sun set behind the mountains. She's trying, he said softly. That's more than she's ever done before. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the crisp autumn air. Do you think she'll ever really accept us? Accept how we live? Honestly, I don't know. But I think she's finally realized she has to try if she wants to keep us in her life. Richard kept me updated on Victoria's progress. She was still living by the traditional rules he'd imposed, but something had changed. Instead of viewing it as punishment, she seemed to be using it as a way to understand. She made dinner last night, he told me during one of our calls. Burned the chicken completely, but she didn't throw anything. Instead, she laughed. Actually laughed, Emma. Then she asked me to teach her how to use the oven properly. I was in Mom's kitchen when he told me this, rolling out dough for another pie. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was doing the very traditional task Victoria had insisted upon, but by choice, not obligation. I looked at my flour-covered hands and thought about how things we love can become poisonous when forced upon others. A month after the confrontation, Victoria asked if she could come visit again. This time, she arrived alone, carrying a covered dish. I made it myself, she said awkwardly, holding out what appeared to be a somewhat lopsided apple pie. Margaret helped. It's not pretty, but it's edible. We tested it. Dad, Bless him. Serve that pie after dinner with the same reverence he'd always shown Mom's cooking. It wasn't great, the crust was tough, and the filling a bit too sweet, but watching Victoria beam with genuine pride made it taste better than any five-star dessert. As we sat around Dad's kitchen table, Victoria spoke hesitantly. I've been thinking a lot about what Marcus said, about partnerships, about how I treated you, Emma. She twisted her napkin in her hands. I was wrong. Not just about the cooking, but about everything. I was so focused on maintaining what I thought was proper that I nearly destroyed what was actually important. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Thank you. That means a lot. She squeezed my hand briefly before continuing. My therapist helped me understand something. I wasn't really angry about Marcus cooking. I was afraid that if the world changed too much, there wouldn't be a place for me in it anymore. That all the things I'd built my life around were becoming obsolete. Dad, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Change doesn't make us obsolete, Victoria. It gives us a chance to grow. Sarah, Emma's mama, she taught me that. Every time I learned something new in the kitchen, or she learned something new in my workshop, we grew together. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Your wife sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. Dad smiled. And she would have loved seeing her daughter stand up for what she believes in. 2 months later, Victoria invited us to Boston for Sunday dinner. I entered her kitchen, usually forbidden territory, to find her at the stove, Richard beside her, both wearing aprons. I'm learning to make pasta, she announced, flour streaked across her cheek. Richard's better at it than I am. If you can believe it, apparently he's been secretly cooking for years. 30 years of marriage, Richard grinned. And she never knew I made my own breakfast every morning before work. The pasta was imperfect. Some pieces too thick, others too thin. But as we sat around the Hamiltons' formal dining room, eating misshapen noodles and laughing about cooking disasters, I realized something profound. This was what family really meant. Not perfect roles or rigid traditions, but people growing, changing, and loving each other through it all. Before we left, Victoria pulled me aside. I've been going through my mother's old recipe box, she said, holding out a leather-bound book. I thought, well, maybe we could try some of these together? You could show me how to adapt them for modern tastes. And perhaps, she hesitated, perhaps I could share stories about where they came from? I hugged her, feeling her stiffen momentarily before relaxing into the embrace. I'd like that, I whispered. Mom left me her recipes too. Maybe we could combine them. She nodded, tears in her eyes. A blending of traditions, like our family. Later that night, back in our Boston apartment, Marcus found me in our kitchen, going through Mom's recipes and Victoria's family cookbook. What are you thinking about? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against him, looking at the two recipe books side by side. About how love is like cooking. Sometimes you follow the recipe exactly, and sometimes you have to improvise. But what matters most is not the method, but the heart you put into it. He kissed my temple. My wise wife. Your cooking disaster-prone mother. I teased back. We laughed together, and I thought about how far we'd come. The storm had passed, leaving behind not destruction, but growth. Victoria was learning to cook. Richard was sharing his secret culinary skills. Dad was finishing Mom's rocking chair. And Marcus and I were stronger than ever. Mom's voice seemed to whisper in my heart, see, baby girl, some traditions are worth keeping, others worth changing, but love, real love, that's the ingredient that makes it all work. I picked up my phone and texted Victoria. Sunday dinner at our place next week? I'll teach you Mom's pie crust secret if you'll share your grandmother's sauce recipe. Her response came quickly. I'd like that. Very much. Outside our kitchen window, the city lights twinkled like stars, different from my mountain home, but beautiful in its own way. like families, like love, like change itself,